Hi folks, I'm Chris Marshall with Woodworker's Journal magazine. One of the easiest ways to duplicate parts in woodworking is to use a template like this. Typically they're made of thin scraps of plywood, hardboard, MDF, or really any material that has a solid, smooth edge to it. And with a template, you can use a piloted straight bit in your handheld router or your router table to make parts that match the shape of the template quickly and easily. And with a template, you can make as many of these parts as you need, one after the next, because their shapes will match exactly. In the case of this Adirondack chair project, there's actually a number of parts that benefit from making templates. One of them is this angled seat frame piece. Another one are these curved arm braces. And a third are the arms themselves. And that's because of all the curves and special shapes you need to make. With a template, you only need to figure out these shapes once. And in a popular outdoor project like an Adirondack chair, you'll be glad you've got the templates, because once you've built one of these chairs, you're going to start getting orders from family and friends to make more. I guarantee it. Another piece that benefits from templates are these tapered back slats. You don't have to measure and cut these angles carefully for each and every slat because the template takes care of the accuracy for you. Now, making templates is pretty easy. Draw the shape, cut it out with your jigsaw or bandsaw, and sand the edges smooth. There's no real magic to that. But what I want to show you here is how to use one of these templates to make the duplicate part. I also want to help you avoid a common pitfall with grain direction when you're making a complex shape like this seat frame. So let's use this template to make one of these parts. But before we jump into that, let's take a look at 3 different bit options for template routing. Here's a flush trim bit, a pattern bit, and a double bearing flush trim bit. I've also got a template attached to a workpiece here. Now, a flush trim bit has a bearing on the tip, and its diameter matches the diameter of the cutters. The bearing rides along the edge of the template, and the cutters trim off the excess waste on the workpiece. It's probably the most common template routing bit. The difference with a pattern bit is the bearing is mounted to the shank of the bit rather than the tip. If you're using a pattern bit in a handheld router, the template has to be on top of the workpiece, so the bearing can follow it that way. And if you're using a pattern bit in a router table, the template has to be on the bottom of the workpiece for the same reason, so the bearing can reach it there. My favorite template routing bit is actually the double bearing flush trim bit, and here's why. It doesn't matter if the template is on top or the bottom, because the bit has 2 bearings on it that can reach it either way. If the template is on the bottom, you can raise the bit and use the bottom bearing to follow the template. And if the template is on top, you can lower the bit to use the top bearing to follow the template instead. So for our routing example here, I'm going to use this bit. The first step in template routing is to trace the template shape onto your workpiece. If the template has a long, straight edge, line that edge up with the edge of your workpiece. That way, you'll have one less edge to route. Then cut the shape out with a jigsaw or bandsaw. Leave about a 1/16 inch of waste outside the layout line. There's no need to be exact here. Now we need to stick the template to the workpiece. And good old double-sided carpet tape works great for that job. But you don't need huge pieces of it. Just make them about 1.5 inches long and stick them around the perimeter of the template. Usually 1 piece every foot or so is good enough. Then set the template on your workpiece and line it up so that it's centered between your layout lines. And press it down firmly to stick the pieces tight. Now install the templating bit in your router or router table and set the machine to full speed. But before we do our routing, we need to do a little bit of strategizing, thinking about grain direction. Now, if you're routing a template and workpiece like this backslat template, where the edges are effectively straight, grain direction isn't a big deal, because regardless of which way you feed it past the router bit, the bit is following the long grain of the wood, and the cuts will be clean and smooth. But this seat frame template is a trickier deal, and that's because of these curves on the end and this diagonal edge. Effectively, these curves and this diagonal are cross grain cuts that can go against the grain. Now, when you're template routing, if you route against the grain, the bit will tear out bits of wood and can leave a rough cut. And that's particularly a problem if you're routing a coarse-grained wood like cedar or oak. And if the workpiece is really narrow and you go against the grain, the bit can literally grab the workpiece and break it, which is a dangerous situation. It doesn't always happen. You don't always get a rough cut when you route against the grain, but it's good to take precautions. So whenever possible, what you want the router bit to do is follow with the grain direction around a curve or a diagonal, instead of against it. So here's how we're going to route this seat frame template. We're going to start just past this tight curve, and we'll make one long template routing pass all the way to the end. That will allow the bit to follow this curve with the grain around to the end. Then we'll spin the workpiece around, and we'll route this diagonal cut, because again, the orientation of the bit and the template will allow the bit to follow the diagonal with the grain, not against it. Finally, for our third cut, we'll flip the template and workpiece over, and we'll clean off the last little bit of waste on this tight curve, because the bit, again, will be able to follow the grain with the grain and not against it. To make the first cut, adjust the bit so the top bearing is even with the template. Then start the cut, feeding the workpiece from right to left along the bit. The bit will trim off the waste material flush with the template. Well, that takes care of the first cut. Now all we have to do to make this diagonal cut is to turn the template and workpiece around from the first cut. The same template and bit orientation will allow us to route this diagonal with the grain. Let's go ahead and make that cut. So now we're ready to make the third and final routing pass on this tight curve to take away the last bit of waste. But if we were to do it the way we've done the other two, with the template on top and the bit set as it is, we'd be routing into this tight curve and against the grain, which is a bad idea. So what we need to do instead is flip the template and workpiece upside down and turn it around, and then raise the router bit so that second bearing can touch the template along the bottom. That's why I like the double bearing flush trim bit. Just raise the bit so the bottom bearing makes contact with the template on the bottom this time. Then route the tight curve. Notice that the bit is cutting with the grain this way. So the routing is done. Now the template can come off. And I usually do that with a paint scraper. I just fit the paint scraper between the template and the workpiece and pry the tape loose. And once you start to get it loose, you can usually just peel the template off the rest of the way by hand. Then peel off the tape and clean up any sticky residue with acetone or a sharp cabinet scraper. And that's how you make parts that match perfectly. Template routing is a safe and effective way of duplicating parts. Just plan your cuts carefully, considering grain direction, and you'll have good success. Thanks for watching.